Alrighty, it's the end of the year. There's not a whole lot going on this week. I'm personally struggling to find eggnog in stores. I'm going to try and make some on my own, which, my first attempt wasn't too great. Uh, I ended up curdling the eggs, unfortunately, but after straining out the eggs that had already curdled, I ended up with something that was very thick and rich. So, um, you know, a failed first attempt, but not a total loss. I'll do it differently this time, and I think it'll work out just fine. But, menial tasks like trying to not curdle the eggnog are a bit easier to reason through these days than trying to understand the direction that our society is moving in. There's so much that's been going so wrong for so long that I think I've become a bit numb to it. When I first started this channel, it was my way of venting because I had so much to say about everything that was going wrong. And it was a time a lot like this one. At least it felt like it. It was at the start of 2018, I believe. No, it wasn't. It was the start of 2019. That's when I started this channel. It'll be 4 years now, I guess. And so we're coming up, I guess, this January or February on the 4th anniversary of this channel. And in that time, our society's become more decadent and depraved than ever. The cost of living is more outrageous than at any point in my lifetime. Everything that you could have imagined as just being a fact of life seems to be liquid and in motion. And yet, things feel so very stagnant and boring. There's a war going on in Ukraine that at any moment could spiral into a third world war. There is the, what would you call it, an epidemic, a strange occurrence of and surge of sudden adult death syndrome in the West, which officially goes completely unexplained. And, as far as public is concerned, it probably will remain that way for many, many years. Although when all is said and done, the reality will probably suggest that sudden adult death syndrome was a man-made crisis. But of course, we're really not supposed to talk about that now because it would harm the bottom line of some very politically well-connected and entrenched interests. Likewise, with the altogether stupid war in Ukraine, where you have some bad mafia guys fighting some other bad mafia guys. Some of them identify with the Soviet Union from World War II and their mission. Others identify with the Third Reich and their mission. And frankly, I look at the Soviet Union and the Third Reich and I say, you know what, not really a friend to either of you. And I don't think that I want to get involved in a dispute between your cultural heirs. Honestly, the war in Ukraine has turned into the next war in Afghanistan. And in fact, folks in the Biden administration, I can't remember who it was now, I think it might have been Tony Blinken himself, the Secretary of State, basically said, it was great timing when we got out of Afghanistan because we could then immediately shift all those resources to Ukraine. And now Ukraine, it's the war that, you kind of think about it. By the end of next year, nobody will remember Ukraine, just so you know. Sometimes it still gets discussed a little bit. Trust me, the flags are going to come down even in the liberal neighborhoods. The bumper stickers will fade. People will sell the cars. The dealerships will peel the old stickers off, and no one will put on new Ukrainian flag bumper stickers. The war in Afghanistan drug on for 20 years. Nobody thought about it after the first couple of years. Certainly not after like 2004. After Obama was elected in 2008, Afghanistan never mentioned again. And Ukraine will be like that too. It's making a lot of bad people a whole hell of a lot of money. And, the United States is a dying empire, doesn't care about its finances. We're not going to miss, a few hundreds of billions, a few trillions here and there. It was already going out the door in Afghanistan, so whatever money we're not spending on Afghanistan, we can spend on Ukraine and not even feel it. And so at this point, after a year, do I think that Ukraine's going to spiral into World War III? No. I think we're just back to Afghanistan. We got rid of one war, and then here we go. We got a whole nother one. And I think we're spending money in Ukraine at a much faster rate. So it is a worse situation. Here, at the time of the Afghan pullout, I said, hey, at least Biden actually went through with it. He didn't keep delaying it. He delayed it a little bit, but he did eventually get out. And I was going to, pat him on the back for that. But now we've got Ukraine, which is a far worse situation. Frankly, I'd rather the war in Afghanistan had continued and the war in Ukraine just, not been any of the U.S.'s business. But, and to be honest, they would have done all this stuff for Ukraine anyway, even if Afghanistan was still going on. Because think about all the other wars that aren't called Afghanistan that the U.S. was already involved with. To call them endless is an understatement. At this point, there's no turning the ship around. I've said that for a long time. But honestly, I'm not sure how long it will take for the United States to truly sink. Do I think it'll be within my lifetime? Certainly. But is it going to be in the next 5 years? It could be, but I don't have much reason to believe that. I mean, and that's the sad thing. That's the only thing that we can have hope for now. And since it's something I haven't talked about in a while, when I say collapse, I mean the currency will collapse and therefore collapse the state. The state doesn't really, and by the state I mean the federal government, doesn't really operate on any kind of normal like tax and spend model. Taxes are kind of window dressing. So is debt. What the U.S. does is it leverages the strength of the U.S. dollar, creates money out of thin air, spends it into existence, as some might say. And so, as long as the dollar is dominant and resilient, the U.S. can spend limitless amounts of money. If the dollar weakens, if the dollar loses strength and prominence in the world, all of a sudden the dollars that the U.S. is issuing no longer are worth what they used to be. And yes, we've had quite a bit of inflation by American standards, but it's not the kind of inflation that brings down regimes. It would be if that inflation actually factored into the rate of interest, if there was a true interest rate premium, if we didn't have severely negative interest rates in real terms, that would collapse the government because Treasury yields would spike so high that the regime would no longer be able to make its interest payments. But we haven't seen that. The U.S. monetary regime is extraordinarily hardy and has been able to withstand more abuse than any other monetary system in history. The U.S. government is the most fiscally irresponsible, I guess you would say, to use a completely sterile and soulless term. And the U.S. acts this way, not because anyone voted for it, not because that's what people want, but because it can. And the people who control the levers of power are able to skim a lot of profits for themselves off the top. And so they are operating the regime in a way to maximize their personal enrichment. And in order to break this cycle, the machine must be broken. You're not going to have some virtuous philosopher king take the reins of power, as I think a very small contingent of people on the right believe. Most people on the right, I think, don't have much of a, just like with the left, they don't have much in the way of coherent ideas for the future. But those who do on the right generally think, oh, well, we'll just get our philosopher king in there, and he will be, American Napoleon. And while I would admit, Napoleon was one of the great men of history, he was able to single-handedly change the history of France and of Europe. great men are few and far between. They have to be born at the right time, in the right place. And then they not only have to be born into the right circumstances, they then have to want what it is that they're capable of. And so the idea that you can wait around for a great man of history to salvage this decadent, disgusting state, and for some reason turn it into Napoleonic France, which is not something that, not really a place I'd want to live in. You can say, okay, Napoleonic France, it was maybe, like efficient or well run in a certain weird, like objective sense, that it was a better organization and more coherent than the Revolutionary Republic. Yes, I'll agree. Napoleon is preferable to the Reign of Terror, but that doesn't make Napoleon a great option. A better option for France back then and a better option for the United States now would be total collapse of the centralized state. The U.S. has exhausted its reserves of talent within its elite class. We're down to people like Joe Biden. So I think it's better to look at the regime as a constant. It's not something that we can take control of, even though as much as I enjoy talking about elections and interesting people, I like to have some hope like that. It's fun. But after things settle down, and I'm not like being a doomer about elections. This was how I felt going into 2016. And then, after Trump got elected, I said, okay, well, let's, give him a shot or whatever. Of course, the system beat him back. And then, you had Lake this year, and I thought, let's see what happens with her. Maybe it'll be something. The system beat her back pretty decisively. And what that shows is that, there are good people, there are some good-willed folks in this country. But now is not their time to shine. Things still must get worse before they can get better. And it may take the rise of an anti-American bloc like, one led by China and Russia in order to really strike at the financial dominance of the dollar and therefore erode the purchasing power of the federal government. And that's not exactly something, that I'd be happy to see. I wouldn't be happy if, you got copies of China and Russia all over the world, although, it's not like the West is, it's not like I want to see the world look like the West either. The West is gross. I would like to see the world, maybe go a third way that is, and by third way, I don't mean like Juan Perón and in Tito, and who was the third leg of that stool? Nasser in Egypt. That's not the kind of third way I'm talking about. I mean, not woke, decadent, and satanic like the West, but also, not a censored single-party state like China. But, history moves much faster when you're reading about it in a book. I think I've brought this up quite a bit before. And it's tough when you're actually living through it. Because kind of, based on, the past, other nations that have been in these situations, how things can end one way or the other, the different things that can happen. But it takes so long for that to happen. It can take centuries. Look at the Ottomans. Look at the Romans. Look at the Byzantines. Look at China. Singular events in history that we think about, like the so-called fall of the Roman Empire, that took centuries. That played out over centuries. You could have, been living 150 years before the so-called fall of the Roman Empire, and said, "Wow, Rome is in, unmistakable decline. We're never coming back from this. We're just going to have to start over with something fresh. After the dust settles and the empire completely collapses." Yeah, you could have said that. You would have been right, but you are 150 years too early. And so I think that the only way to get through times like these is to focus on what you actually can control, which, to a certain extent is your own life. You don't have total control over your life. You don't exist in a vacuum. You live in this world, and that's why it's interesting to talk about. That's why it's important to talk about. But at some point, we have to accept our own limitations and just try to do what we can. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.